Welcome to Game 7 of the greatest online blitz match ever played. So in the last game, Game 6, we saw a draw between Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja, and in this game Magnus says, right, I need to get back into more strategical battles. I'm getting into these street fights and I'm getting stung by Alireza. He's so quick, he's so tactical. So what could Magnus do here playing with the white pieces? Well, he kicks off with pawn to e4. And I should say, by the way, for new viewers, this is the Banter Blitz Final 2020. So we had pawn c5 now from Alireza. So he immediately deviates. He's been playing e5 in the last two games and he's lost both of them. So now he goes for c5. We had knight to f3, pawn e6. And now you could go d4, main line open Sicilian, but Magnus goes g3 instead. We had knight to c6 here, bishop g2, this one came to f6, and now this is the setup of these closed Sicilian structures, but they can carry a lot of venom later in the game if you know what you're doing. So pawn d5 played, the queen came to e2, you don't want those queens coming off the board, bishop e7, and now Magnus goes e5 immediately. He kicks that knight and he gains this nice space advantage. It gives him opportunities to attack the king later on. And this is why Alireza now hesitated. So after Magnus went pawn to c4, he spent 30 seconds on his next move. Now this c4 break is really nice because if black kicks on like this isn't what happened, then you open this diagonal, but more importantly, you close the center. So you give white a free hand to attack on the king side here. Now, this is how the line could have gone. You don't have to play like this, but this is a typical kind of King's Indian attack structure. I just want to show you some of the themes here. So black comes on the queen side, but white gets maneuvers like this in. And after knight g4, you're getting big kingside attacks here. Computer gives it level, but it's very scary to play, especially in blitz. So Alireza didn't want to go in for this stuff. He didn't close the position. He went queen c7 here. And this is where Magnus is saying, right, let's try and play strategically. That might give me the upper hand. So now Magnus took on d5. He's been given that opportunity. So the recapture happened here, and it isn't an ideal pawn structure for black, but okay, it gives some dynamic play. Now Magnus goes knight to c3. He leaves this pawn to actually be taken because if Alireza takes it, then Magnus jumps in here. Now this line isn't so terrible for black, it's a different game, but white is slightly for choice with that lead in development. So instead of going for this, Alireza played knight b6, covering this pawn. Now we had bishop to f4, bishop e6, and pawn to h4 now from Magnus. He could have just castled there. Instead, he secures this bishop on f4, but this is slightly double-edged because black hasn't castled yet. This could be used as a lever later on to rip open the position, and that's exactly what we see here. So queen d7 was played, castles from Magnus, pawn h6, queen to d2, and Magnus says at this point, well, okay, at least it's going to be tricky for him to castle now, because if Firouzja castles, you can start looking at these sacrifices. But then, just as Magnus says that, Firouzja goes queenside. And Magnus says, okay, he's just castled queenside with no regard for humanity. So we have a really exciting position here. Both kings castled on opposite sides. What happens next? And if you're enjoying this video, do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Never miss another one in the series. So here Magnus now plays pawn to a4. He immediately starts attacking. Alireza goes pawn a5. He doesn't want to allow Magnus to do that. We had knight to b5, using that newly created weakness and looking in here. And now Alireza wonders, should I prepare pawn to g5 with say rook here to g8 or king b8, or should I just play it in one? And of course he goes the Alireza way, he just plays it in one here. A very double-edged move, not necessarily good when you run it through the engines, but he loves mixing it up like this. And it's not easy to refute over the board when you're in time trouble. So now Magnus is looking to capture here potentially. That knight's a powerful piece, so Alireza just chops it off the board. This one recaptures, and here he doesn't even bother about his rook. He's going purely for the initiative. He plays bishop to h3 here, trying to get that good defender off the board and then bring his queen in, supported by the rook. So if you capture this rook on d8, which didn't happen, then you can take here. Now you should really be retreating your bishop back to block the rook, because if you take this one, then the queen dives in and you're in all sorts of trouble. You've got this one coming in with check as well, that's the thing. So we didn't have takes on d8 by Magnus. Instead, he went pawn to f4. Now we had takes on g2, the queen recaptured, and the other rook came to the party here, eyeing down against these pieces. And now Magnus was too responsive to Alireza's threats. We saw that a bit in this match. So he should go on his own counter-attack here, bring this rook, attack that pawn, go for the black king. And you don't have to be too afraid of the rook capturing here. Maybe this is what he was worried about. Now you should start with king b8, so that after captures, if you take with the rook here, then the knight is free to come, it's not pinned to the king. But this is just good for white really. You can bring the rook to the 7th, the queen can come to e2 soon. It's just a nice position, and actually white is attacking black. But instead of going for these counterplay ideas, Magnus here played bishop to f6, attacking the rook, but just encouraging it to actually come up the board and double on the g file here. So king f2 was played, Magnus starts running with his king, the rook's doubled, and now Magnus has to drop the bishop back, cover the pawn, and this is the problem, he's lost quite a bit of time now. So the king came to b8, Alireza steps away from these checks. Now the rook came to the c file, but here it's just a tempo or two too late, because knight b4 comes now, and you can't capture the pawn, or you're running into this tactic and losing your rook due to the fork. So after this knight b4 move, queen to f3 covers the pawn, but now the a4 pawn is on prise, and after that one's taken, your knight is loose behind it. So Magnus saved his knight here, but now Alireza picks up on b2. The rook came to c3, covering the pawn for a second time because it was attacked twice. And now Alireza just plays very simply, this is blitz chess, let's eliminate the most powerful white piece in the position. So he plays this exchange sack, Magnus goes rook b3, it hits this knight here, and actually there was a really powerful reply of pawn to c4. You're not necessarily going to see this in blitz chess, but if this one is taken, then you can go knight d3 check, and you're doing really well. So okay, we didn't have pawn c4, instead knight a4 was played, saving the knight. Now we had rook to a1 attacking it, but pawn b5 defends. And look at these monster pawns on the 5th rank streaming down the board here. So the queen came to e2, and Magnus says at this point, I don't even know what to play anymore, and he was really deflated at how he'd just let this attack rage on. And now best here for Alireza was pawn to d4. It just shuts everything in on the queen side. This rook can't get back into the game. These rooks are looking really silly compared to the knights. But instead he goes pawn c4, also looks logical, not a bad move, but after the captures, recaptures, now this rook can escape, and Magnus is starting to get counterplay here. And best for Alireza was something like knight to d3 check. Then the king will move away and you can start slow playing it with queen to d4. You want to keep this knight there really, keep the rook blocked out. But what Alireza did was knight to c5. Looks logical to bring it from the rim back into the game, but now you drop a pawn here and both rooks are now getting quite active in the game. Now the players are down very low on time of course, so this check was played. Magnus correctly stepped to a light square here. Just going back, if he comes to a dark square, well then queen b6 is strong. You hit this rook which is unprotected, you hit this one, and knight d5 is coming. Not good for white. So king f1 played, the queen came to c6, and it was looking to check down here, and that's why queen f3 was played, covering the diagonal. And it's very double-edged right now, a dynamically balanced position. So the knight came to d5 here, and Magnus should just retreat this rook to e2. Ask black what's the next move. But he takes this one here. Although it looks nice to eliminate that powerful piece, now you've left this long diagonal here as we can see. So the knight came to c7, covering this pawn, and now Magnus was so preoccupied with this check on h1, he played king f2 and completely forgot about his unprotected rook here. Alireza pounced, queen b6 check. The king moved away and the rook was picked up. So the game's as good as done here. Magnus was very deflated. We had a few more moves here. Magnus tried to bring his bishop back into the game, but it was all way too little too late now. This one came down here with check, and that was the final move of the game. So Alireza goes up in the match here. If you want to see the next game, then tune in tomorrow and see the whole playlist. Click here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.